Hey everybody. I'm realizing this is just playing one note over and over again. This had an arpeggio going. I must have bumped something because it's just set to latch. Nice. Ignore me. That's what it was. Okay. All right. So, for today's stream, I thought it might be interesting, because this is something I've personally wanted to do for a while, but just haven't really managed the time for. The original 1971 owner's manual for the ARP2600. This synth, for those of you who don't know, and a lot of you probably do know, but you know, I don't want to assume that. This synth was originally created to be an educational tool. That's the reason for the layout, why it's so well labeled and kind of spread out. This was Perlman's sort of decision on the easiest way to present these functions, and I forget, there may have been a designer involved that wasn't Perlman. I should have actually checked those facts before I started rambling on about this, but point being that this was intended to teach synthesis, and so is the original 1971 manual. So I've been curious to go through this from that perspective and just kind of get a feel for what's in here. And yeah, I could do that by myself in my own time, but as a synthesis primer, I thought it might be an interesting topic for a stream. Because there is a lot of good information in here. I mean, I think some of it's pretty basic. But I think it does get into slightly more complicated topics. I mean, there's essentially formulas and stuff in here. They're simple formulas, but nonetheless. So, I thought I'd give this a shot. And let's see here. Just make sure my chat view is working. Okay. So, cautionary tale, by the way. I had a guitar loop going that I really liked, but all of this stuff is done in the Instro Lube, and that I have controlled by a foot switch on the ground. And the two controls I have on the foot switch, so I'm using the Rock with the foot switch that it comes packaged with to control the looper, and the two controls I have assigned are record, initialize, and erase. And I tend to be a bit clumsy when walking around the studio, and I stepped on the erase switch and lost my loop that I really liked quite a bit. And there may be a way to reclaim that. There may be an undo, but if it is, it's a key command that I haven't learned. So yeah, that's gone forever as far as I know. Unless it got saved to the drive, but I think it probably would have been overwritten. I don't know, I have to check that. Anyway, that was kind of a bummer thing to do, like right before the stream, so I had to remake the loop. It's not as good as the original was, but it's fine, it works. So right now, what you're hearing is you're hearing my pedal board setup with some looped guitar, and then that's all through a bunch of delays. And then you're hearing the ARP just with a very slow arpeggio. So I'm gonna pull down the guitar to just leave the synth. And I have to decide. I mean, I might bring that back just as a quiet background, just so it's a little bit more than these basic synth sounds while we're working through this. But and a little bit about the setup here. So this is a Korg ARP2600 reissue, the FS, the full size, with the keyboard and everything. And then this up here, and I think just a frame above it, is a case that has nothing in it right now because it is the start of a DIY project that I have not embarked on yet. But I was just kind of testing the brackets and checking everything for size. But this here is the Antinous side carp, as it's called. And so what you're hearing right now is it's just the normalized path on the synth, but then right at the end stage, I'm basically like patching the VCA output twice to the mixer stage here, because it's normal to the one connection. And in case you're very new to synthesis, normal just means, or electronics in general, normal just means a pre-existing connection. You can usually break normal connections by either interrupting with a patch point or a switch or something to those effect. But so in this case, the jacks have a pre-wired connection, and then if you patch something into the jack, it breaks that connection. So what I've done here is I just have the 1-bit delay, multi-tap delay by, I think that's Feedback Systems, or so, I forget what their brand name is. They just have a little insignia there, which is like a backwards F and a forwards F. So, but I think they're Feedback Systems. I forget the full company name. But anyway, that's the 1-bit delay, and then I have the Recovery Effects cutting room floor as the other channel. So it's just basically 2 delays. And if I go to, if I speed up the arpeggio here, and then shorten the attack, and the release, and the decay, then you'll start to hear those 2 delays kind of interacting. But anyway, and right now the arpeggiator is set to like up down, so it basically whatever. So the keyboard's set to latch. So any keys that I play, it will just repeat that pattern, and then the arpeggiator is set to up down. So it basically will run up the sequence and then back down the sequence. Starts with the lowest note and goes to the highest, basically. But anyway, so I think, though, for the purpose of what we're doing here, I'd rather not run it through any effects or anything, so we'll just undo these. And now well, actually, that's true. That one for now I do still want to keep, because otherwise there's no envelope really to. So you're hearing the internal spring reverb there. I'm going to pull that down a little bit. And then the keyboard has an octave switch here, so that's the standard position. That's up 2 octaves, and then down 2 octaves. So we'll cut the filter a little bit here, just to kind of give it something that's not too intrusive as a background thing here. And so the sidecar, this is something that I picked up along with the case for the Stepbrother, which is Antonis's remake of the ARP sequencer that was designed to accompany the 2600. So that I have as a DIY kit. Those of you who have been with me in some Discord servers that I'm on may remember the fiasco that was trying to get that whole thing delivered from SynthCube. It was ordered and then kind of just disappeared. But I mostly sorted it out. Not going to get into that here, though. I don't want to have this be a retailer bashing live stream. But was not happy with that process. But anyway, originally I was intended to receive the case for the Stepbrother kit through SynthCube, and they were having trouble delivering on that. So eventually they mostly refunded me for my purchase, and I went straight to Antonis for it. And it took me a while to actually get around to finally ordering it and everything, but I did that late last year. And the build time and stuff takes a little while, so there's about a turnaround of about a month in there or something. And he shipped it out, and it came, I think it was last week or maybe the week before at this point. And I got everything set up. So the setup that I'm using for the sidecar, so this is basically just a small Eurorack addition to the 2600, and it has these brackets that basically allow it to sit. I mean, if you're just doing the sidecar, you probably don't really need the brackets because it has some really solid feet, and it is sized so that it would just like sit right on top of the cabinet. But since I'm also including the Stepbrother up there once it's done, I asked for the brackets for the whole kind of setup so that it's all stable and kind of one big unit. So the modules that I chose to put in here are kind of just, they were admittedly sort of like extra modules that I had around. I haven't been that intentional about this layout yet, but the idea of it is, things that will augment the ARP patch points in interesting ways. So there's a pair of delays here, there's a pair of distortions, there's another oscillator and filter, and then there's 4-channel VCA and envelope generator. There's a matrix mixer to run whatever, 4 channels that I choose into those various effects to, and be able to change the mix of those. There's a set of 4-channel mutes ahead of that for anything that I, run into the matrix mixer, so that I can just cut that channel easily if I want. There are also mutes in the matrix mixer, but it's per combination. So if you wanted to mute all of a single signal, you'd have 4 buttons that you had to hit. So this just simplifies that and allows me. It also has this is the DivKit mutes. It also has momentary functionality, so I can just kind of drop out a channel briefly if I want. And then partially because of the internals of this case and how it's designed, the main block for the power supply sits under this side here, and so I chose, rather than to have to create some custom cabling to make sure power connections could reach, because I'm running low on longer cables at the moment. I decided to put this Future Sound Systems MTX9 pin matrix in here, because I thought it might be fun to be able to take outputs from the ARP and set them up as inputs to the pin matrix, and then have these destinations here, and then just be able to like pin patch different combinations of things to be able to move quickly and kind of experiment easily. So I think for today, we'll see how this goes, depending on how, I can't decide if I just want to kind of work through the manual verbatim. We'll have to see how it feels, or if it's just going to be like a jumping off point for experimentation with the synth and stuff. But yeah, I've had the ARP for a while now. It sounds so good in just a basic subtractive capacity that I have a tendency to just kind of stay there with it, and that's part of the reason I thought it might be fun to work through this as sort of an experimental stream, because I mean, there's like voltage processors and stuff. I hardly even use those tools. I really just use like the subtractive path and like stick to it that way. And I do minor patching with it and stuff, but yeah, it's pretty funny. I mean, I think it's a testament to how good the design of this layout is, that it hasn't really, I haven't even wanted to veer too far from it, because I love the sound of this synth just as a basic subtractive synth with some FM and stuff. Like, I love it. It's such a great sounding synth. So I haven't gotten too experimental with it, and I want to change that. And I thought, yeah, going through the original 1971 manual might be a fun way to kind of, force that, like use that as a forcing factor, sort of. So anyway, that's the idea. So let's see. And for the record, I do try to be very careful with like copyrights and things on these streams, but I figure a reprinted manual from 1971 is probably just about as close to public domain as you can get at this point. I think it should be okay for me to run through this on the stream. We'll see. So I don't think we really need to go over the instructions for unpacking. But I'm going to read through a little bit of this just for context, and then we'll figure out how much we actually want to cover verbatim and that sort of thing. So this is Chapter 1, the start of the manual. It says, this manual is designed to serve 2 purposes. The first is to serve as an instruction book for the ARP Model 2600 electronic music synthesizer. The second is to serve as a general introduction to the terms, concepts, and practices involved in electronic sound synthesis. We have designed it to serve this purpose because, first of all, there is at present no such general introduction available, and second, because the ARP2600 is specifically designed for those who have no prior experience either in using synthesizers or in thinking about sound in the peculiar way that working with a synthesizer leads one to think. The paragraphs in this manual are numbered decimally to correspond with the structure of topics. The most important general headings are numbered with a single digit. Okay, you don't really need to know about that part. That's more for me. The general headings and their numbers will be as follows. Number 1, the manual. 2, electronic sound synthesis and synthesizers. 3, the ARP2600, a general description. 4, the ARP2600 functions individually. And 5, using the ARP2600 or how to put it all together. Followed by the appendix. So, one of the things I love about this manual is these illustrations that they've included. I don't know how visible that is for you there. But there's a lot of great little, they're almost like doodles to accompany the text in here. So this feels like, I mean, the name of my stream for a long time has been Analog Storytime, and I feel like this is as close to a literal translation of that title as has ever happened here. But so, you know, and feel free to jump in the chat if you. I can't decide if this is a silly thing to be doing on a stream, but I've wanted to do it. I thought maybe it'd be fun. So anyway, two basic ideas are involved in all electronic music synthesizers. The first is that acoustical waveforms can be generated and modified purely by electronic means. Banging on a garbage can lid generates a horrible racket by mechanical means. The racket is a very complicated sound, but no matter how complicated it gets, it can be reproduced by a single, long, and complicated wiggle in a phonograph record. So can a symphony. From a certain point of view, all sounds you've ever heard, ever will hear, and ever could imagine must be reducible to one, or at most two, one for each ear, complicated wiggle of your eardrums. Edison's phonograph recorded by mechanical means the vibration he fed into it. The cylinder, and later the disc, stored them as mechanical wiggles in a groove. On playback, running this groove past a needle made the needle wiggle. The needle made a diaphragm vibrate, and the diaphragm passed it on to the air in the form of pressure vibrations, and the air transmitted the sound waves to somebody's ears. Nobody has done it that way for quite a while now. Today, a microphone turns sound waves into electrical signals. In other words, rapid and periodic fluctuations in air pressure are transformed into rapid and periodic fluctuations in some electrical phenomenon, usually a voltage. In this form, the wave can be electrically amplified, equalized, filtered, and subjected to various other indignities before being sent to a recording lathe that turns it back again into a mechanical waveform in a groove. Likewise, when the record is played, the stylus wiggles the way it did in Edison's player, but its vibrations are immediately turned into electrical signals. They don't become mechanical again until they reach the loudspeaker. So I'm just going to pause here to say part of the reason that I enjoy this manual so much is the 1971 context of it. I mean, it's, you know, speaking about vinyl as a very current thing, and like a very common reproduction medium at that time. And I mean, it's humorously written. I just enjoy it. So, yeah, anyway. In all this, the only thing that doesn't change is the shape of the wave, i.e. the waveform. Suppose you bang an A440 tuning fork on the corner of the table. In 1/440th of a second then, the fork makes one complete vibration back and forth. And that's the little diagram here. It's showing that the period of the waveform here is 1/440th of a second. if you had an exceedingly precise barometer around, it would register during the same 140th of a second. Why am I having such trouble saying that? A variation in air pressure. So it's showing high air pressure, low air pressure, and then average air pressure is the zero crossing there. And a nearby microphone connected to a voltmeter would cause the pointer to swing. Positive, negative, 0. The same microphone passing its changing voltages on to an amplifier, and the amplifier feeding its output to a loudspeaker would make the loudspeaker cone move back and forth. So we have back, forth, and position at rest is the 0 mark. Which you will see by referring back to 2.121 is what we began with. Right, so. We have used an extremely simple waveform for these examples, but remember that the process of translating waveforms we have just outlined holds for any waveform whatsoever. In our graphs, the only change from one example to the next has been in the meaning of the vertical dimension of the graph. The horizontal dimension always represents some period of time, while the vertical one changes from representing physical position, the back and forth, of the tuning fork or the loudspeaker cone, to a physical quantity, air pressure, to an electrical quantity, positive or negative voltage. But the waveform is unchanged. Take another look at what we said in, it's apparently going to keep referencing back to these decimal marks on the paragraph. So we're talking back here, discussing the nearby microphone, and ask yourself what the voltmeter would do if instead of being connected to the microphone, it were connected to some kind of electrical circuit that could generate smoothly changing voltages at the rate of 440 times each second. The pointer would swing positive and then negative like this. Again, same diagram. Also, I should say, I find, even though all of this kind of synthesis explanation stuff is sort of, old hat for me, so to speak, I always find this stuff interesting just to hear different presentations on the same subject, because there's always ways that things are characterized and stuff that I find I can use to teach the subjects moving forward. So, not always, but I find it interesting at that level too. So, and the same generating circuit hooked up to the amplifier, hooked up to the speaker, would cause the same back and forth movement as in 2.124, which amounts to getting the sound of a tuning fork without having a tuning fork, or by the same principle, the sound of somebody banging on a garbage can lid without either a garbage can lid or somebody to bang on it, or any sound at all. If you can generate the right waveform electronically, then you can generate the sound. So, a way to think about that, from the perspective of the synth, is we could essentially, let's see. Yeah, so I would have to patch that because the sign outs are not directly available. Well, and come to think, VCO1 doesn't actually even have a sign out. I forgot about that. So I guess basically the way to if we essentially took a simpler waveform, a sine in this case, so back to the concept of normal connections again, none of the sine wave outputs, other than as a control voltage, are are normaled to any of the mixer inputs. So it's basically the VCO1 square wave is what's normaled here. The pulse wave with the variable pulse width is what's normaled to the second mixer channel, this is really the inputs to the filter. Mixer's technically over here, so I tend to think of it as a mixer because you have level control and stuff, but it's really the inputs to the filter. So you have a variable pulse width as the normal connection there, but I have overridden that by taking the sine output here, which is exposed on the panel, and patching that into that input. And that on its own sounds like this. Now, if I take the noise out of there, because there's also noise, and if we drop that reverb out, also, hold on, there is some legato on the pitch there. There we go. So you can hear that's a much simpler tone. And now I have not tuned this with an actual tuner. In theory, what we could in theory do, now I have to turn the arpeggiator off. Okay. And it'll latch that note. Trying to think why the volume is so low for this. Anyway, that's kind of, you could think of that as an extended tone of a tuning fork. Now that's assuming that is actually tuned anywhere near A440, because I have just relative pitch. I don't have perfect pitch. I can't tell if that's an A exactly. It's somewhere in the ballpark, but I don't know how close. And so what we're describing here is the start of the concept of synthesizing this tone, basically. You have a tuning fork. It's a steady A440. It's essentially a sine wave, give or take, and so if you hit that on a table, you're getting essentially that tone. But then with a synthesizer, that's fine. But where things get interesting is adding complexity to that basic tone, and that's what this is all building up to explain, basically. So if we go back to turn the arpeggiator back on, backed up, down. And we can sorry, I'm just tuning everything. Apparently I took that oscillator a bit out. And just kind of returning to a little bit of background for the reading. Let's see what we... So anyway, So where I cut off there. Which amounts to getting the sound of a tuning fork without having a tuning fork, or by the same principle, the sound of somebody banging on a garbage can lid without either a garbage can lid or somebody to bang on it. And a garbage can lid would have a lot more complexity in the sort of timbre of the wave. There'd be a lot more noise. So if you bring in noise there, you can start getting more garbage can-y type sounds. Anyway. The generators we talked about are not imaginary. They exist, and they are called oscillators, and every synthesizer has at least a few of them. A really big synthesizer might have several dozens, so do electronic organs. If the shape of the waveform is modified, so is the sound, and vice versa. Take this for the time being as an ironclad law. There are exceptions, but they don't matter just now. Wrapping an old army blanket around the garbage can lid muffles the sound. Carrying it, wrapped or unwrapped, into a tiled bathroom while you're banging on it changes the sound again, and so on. Anything you can do mechanically to modify the sound is going to show up as a modification in the pattern of air pressure variations, and therefore in the pattern of the changing voltages produced by the microphone. Turn the can lid into a shoebox and kick it across the room, a different waveform. Turn it into a kettle drum, another waveform. Spread rubber cement over the drum head, another waveform. Fill it with water, for every pint, another waveform. Not by much maybe, but still different. By the same principle, any modification in an electrical waveform will modify the sound it makes through an amplifier and loudspeaker. The tone controls on a phonograph change the electrical waveforms that pass through them. Changing stops on an electronic organ or drawbars on an organ changes the electrical waveform produced, and every single control on a synthesizer has some effect on an electrical waveform. The two simplest relationships between waveform changes and sound changes are these. Increasing the amplitude of an audio waveform increases the volume of the sound it makes, but it might make no sound at all. The amplifier might be turned off or the loudspeaker disconnected. The point of this joke is to remind you that electrical variations and sound waves are not, after all, the same kind of activity. There is no sound inside electronic organs or synthesizers either. Sound doesn't enter into the picture at all until the rapidly fluctuating voltages which the organ or synthesizer generates are amplified and fed to a loudspeaker. You are interested only in sounds, but the synthesizer doesn't know that. The amplitude of a waveform is the amount of maximum deviation from its center. In a loudspeaker, this center is the position of the loudspeaker cone at rest. In an electrical circuit, it might be a condition of zero voltage. The amplitude of a loudspeaker cone's motion would be measured in inches, or more likely in fractions of an inch back and forth. The amplitude of a fluctuating or alternating voltage would be measured in volts positive and negative. Thus, a voltage waveform that reached a peak of +1 volts and then of -1 volts would have an amplitude of 2 volts peak to peak. You'll save yourself a lot of confusion by thinking of amplitude only in connection with waveforms and of volume only in connection with sounds. For example, because there are no sounds inside a synthesizer, there cannot logically be any volume controls, but there are a great many amplitude controls. The point of our putting so much emphasis on this distinction will become clearer as you read on. Increasing the frequency of an audio waveform increases the pitch of the sound it makes, but it is important here, just as with amplitude and volume, to keep the two notions distinct. Frequency is a characteristic of physical vibrations, whether mechanical, electrical, or otherwise, but pitch is a peculiar characteristic of the way human beings perceive physical vibrations between approximately 20 Hz and 20 kHz. And of course, the whole point of human perception anyway is to register and take note of changes in one's surroundings. So a change in an audio frequency registers as a change in pitch, but frequency and pitch are not the same. For example, every pitch is produced by some frequency, but many frequencies produce no sense of pitch at all because they're not audio frequencies. Middle C on a piano corresponds with a frequency of about 261 cycles per second, but a frequency of 2.61 cycles per second corresponds to no pitch at all, as it is far below audibility. Here is some useful terminology. Some kinds of vibrations have a repeating pattern. And we can see these are the patterns they're demonstrating. So we have a sawtooth wave, pardon me, that's only existing in positive voltage here based on this description. And then sort of a wiggly, it looks like maybe two additive sine waves or something. But and if they do, they are called periodic. One segment of a periodic vibration from any point in its waveform to the beginning of its repetition is a cycle. The length of one cycle, usually stated in seconds or in fractions of a second, is the period of the waveform, but the number of cycles occurring in a given length of time is the frequency of the vibration. There is an international standard unit of frequency. It is the hertz, abbreviated as Hz, and it is defined as 1 cycle per second. As usual, the prefix kilo means 1,000, and so a vibration or oscillation of 1,000 cycles per second will be spoken of as 1 kilohertz, or 1 kHz. Not all waveforms are periodic. Some waveforms happen only once, and some waveforms are so complicated that your chances of finding any kind of repetition are nil, regardless of what frequency you look for. In this case, the waveform as a whole will show no particular repeating pattern, but only an apparently random motion. For whatever reason, a waveform that does not demonstrate any repeating pattern is called aperiodic. And then they have some illustrations of aperiodic waveforms here, in case you are interested. We will use these terms throughout the rest of this manual. Frequencies of less than 1 hertz will generally be referred to by their period to save you the labor of, say, translating 0.05 hertz into 1 cycle every 20 seconds. Changes in the amplitude or frequency of a periodic waveform are indeed so common, and their relationship to perceived sound so clear, that they are not commonly thought of as involving changes in the shape of the waveform at all. From now on, we will follow this convention. Changing the frequency or amplitude of a wave will not count as a change in its shape. There is a more subtle reason than mere convenience for this practice. Graphically, this waveform here can become this waveform by a mere change of coordinates, and likewise for turning this waveform into this one. They're basically changing the period and squishing them up. But no amount of graphical transformation will turn something like this, a square wave, into this, a sine wave. No change in mere amplitude or frequency, or change in units of measurement. No change in mere amplitude or frequency, or both, or change in units of measurement. The latter is what we mean by a change in coordinates. Changes in the shape of an audio waveform are generally associated with changes in the tone quality or timbre. And there's an asterisk here which reads, timbre is the subjective quality of a tone which enables the listener to distinguish between it and other tones which may have the same pitch or loudness. E.g., trumpets and clarinets produce sounds of different timbres. Change or timbre of the sound produced. Since human perception has limits, there are possible changes in the shape of a waveform that might not be perceived by even the most practiced ear. But anything that is perceived as a change in timbre must be reflected in the waveform being perceived. Summarizing the previous paragraphs, basically by decimal number, gives us these approximate relationships. Subjective changes in perceived correspond to physical changes in these. So subjective changes in perceived volume correspond to physical changes in the amplitude. Changes in pitch correspond to physical changes in the frequency. Changes in timbre or tone color correspond to physical changes in the wave shape or frequency spectrum. of the perceived vibration. This is worth remembering because, as we have emphasized elsewhere, synthesizers work with the qualities listed in the right-hand column for the sake of our perception of those listed in the left-hand column. Anyone who uses a synthesizer regularly must be able to translate easily from the language of volume, pitch, and timbre to the language of amplitude, frequency, and wave shapes. This section of the manual is intended to get you started on this sort of translation back and forth. The oscillators in any synthesizer generate one or more of these simple periodic waveforms: sine, sawtooth, square, triangle, and pulse. A noise generator produces an aperiodic waveform of completely random pattern. A random voltage has very interesting properties. You can think of it statistically as a waveform in which your chances of finding any particular frequency are equal to your chances of finding any other frequency. Strictly speaking, this sort of waveform is called white noise, by analogy with white light. It contains all frequencies just as white light contains all colors. Human ears tend to give undue prominence, for reasons we needn't go into here, to the higher frequencies in white noise signal, so that it sounds like steam escaping from a radiator. If a white noise signal is slightly filtered to produce a noise whose frequency content sounds more equal to human ears, it is called pink noise. Pink noise sounds like Niagara Falls. We can actually demonstrate that here. So if we So that's white noise currently. Actually, let me. Oops, sorry. That's with resonance all the way down. I'm not even going to pull the filter all the way up because it's a little bit much. But so that's white noise. But the circuit will move to pink noise, which sounds more like that. So you can hear the difference there, and then down to low frequency, which is that. So anyway. Okay. From the statistical point of view, what happens when white noise is filtered is simply that the odds of finding any particular frequency in the noise waveform become heavily weighted in favor of some certain range of frequencies. This range is called the bandwidth of the filtered noise. Thus, we can talk about wideband noise, narrowband noise, noise centered around 2 kilohertz, and so on. Each of these waveforms at audio frequencies has its own characteristic sound. We will not try to describe here the sound of each waveform. That will come into your own experience in sections 4 and 5. We will call any periodic waveform with a basic frequency between 20 Hz and 20 kHz an audio waveform. Frequencies below these two extremes are audio frequencies. Frequencies between these two extremes are audio frequencies. Higher frequencies are ultrasonic and lower frequencies are subsonic, or simply low. Our reason for calling some frequencies audio is, of course, simply that only vibrations in this range can produce sounds. If we draw a line and put 1 Hz in the center of it and let the two ends run off to infinity and let every half inch or so represent a multiplication by 10 or division by 10, then we get a graph. And this is the graph that they've plotted. So we're 10 to the negative 7 down here, 10 to the 8th power up here, 1 kilohertz sits here, 1 megahertz sits here, in which the range of human hearing is this range here, audible range. Of course, you can hear things happening at lower frequencies than 20 hertz, but you hear them as separate and repeating sounds, not as continuing tones or noises. Your heart is beating, let's say, 60 times per minute. This is rather low for a pulse rate, but keeps the numbers simple. That's the same as saying it beats once every second, and so we can say it beats at a frequency of 1 hertz. Let's draw a graph. So here's our heartbeat graph. Now imagine your pulse gradually increasing to 120 beats per minute, or 2 hertz. And that's the second graph. And now something like 20 hertz, that's 1,200 times a minute, a lot of adrenaline. Yeah, I'd say. That's that graph. And finally, to say 60 hertz, and that's that there. Somewhere just above 20 hertz, you would lose your sense of individual events happening very rapidly. Instead, you would begin to hear a very low pitch gradually rising with the rising frequency of your heartbeat. And the opposite would happen if your heart began to slow down again. First a descending pitch, then the gradually growing sense of no pitch at all, but rather of separate and countable events. A synthesizer can generate and modify both audio frequencies, i.e. pitches and noise, and low frequencies, i.e. events. You may think of an event that happens only once as having an infinitely low frequency, like picking a guitar string once for all eternity, or beating a drum just once and then traveling on. Playing a note on a piano and repeating it at some regular interval produces a series of events at a low frequency. The events have a certain pitch because each event is the occurrence of an audio frequency vibration. Here's a graph of everything that happens. And so we're just showing a waveform here of 2 different piano notes, I assume. And here's a graph of the low frequency waveform involved, and so that's the striking of the keys there. And the audio frequency that produces the pitch looks all by itself like this. And so that's the frequency of the pitch without the envelope of the attack and decay being applied, basically. Note that in any graph of an event or a series of events, such as the first one above, you can derive the shape of the low frequency waveform involved by simply connecting the highest points in the higher frequency waveform. Thus, we come to the very important notion that events have shapes, and the shape of any event is the shape of the low frequency waveform that can produce the event. Thus, for example, playing a staccato tune on an organ would produce a series of pitches and a series of events of this shape. So there's the pitches, there's the events. Playing the same tune on a guitar would produce perhaps the same pitches, but the events would have a different shape altogether. The shape of an event is called its envelope or contour. In the example given above, we could say that the notes played on the organ have a different envelope from the same notes played on the guitar. Here are some possible envelopes. There's a banjo, distant thunder, piano note fortissimo, piano note soft and staccato, organ note taped and played backwards. That's funny because these are all hand drawn in case you can't tell from that distance. I don't know, but oops, sorry, that's the page you want, right? But anyway, I think it's kind of funny because yeah, like the organ note and the organ note taped and played backwards look pretty much exactly the same, but they're just hand drawn. So banjo taped and played backwards, and so that's, you know, the inverse of, and then Chinese gong. But I do like the way it demonstrates. Like, I like the way it's putting these concepts together. I really do enjoy the fact that this is kind of like a typed manual that someone drew in the margins of, basically, for all of the descriptions. It's fun. Anyway, any low-frequency waveform may be used to produce events and to give them a shape, but usually a synthesizer will have one or more devices designed specifically to generate low-frequency wave shapes suitable for giving events a shape. These are called envelope generators or envelope transient generators. Their output is aperiodic. Instead of appearing over and over again spontaneously, it appears only when the envelope generator is triggered. Other circuitry in any synthesizer modifies waveforms by mixing them, filtering them, or modulating them. Two waveforms can be added together by simply adding their values at every instant. This is easier to show than to talk about. Alright, so now we're getting into small illustrations again. Try to get those visible. So this, which is a sine wave here, added to this, which looks like a higher frequency sine wave, makes this a lumpy sine wave. Once they are mixed, it's practically impossible, except in simple cases, to untangle them again. It may seem odd that when you have mixed together, say, the sound of a violin and the sound of a piano, or any two or more instruments, it is all but impossible to separate them again. But remember what is going on. In electrical terms, a particular sound is not represented simply by a voltage, but by a pattern of voltage fluctuations. So when two or more signals are electronically mixed into one, two or more patterns have been added together to form a more complicated pattern. And the problem of separating them is not a simple problem of dividing a voltage into little voltages, but the much more complicated one of separating patterns, i.e. waveforms, out of one complicated pattern. And that is the interesting, sort of gradual development of things like stem separation and such, and that's why that technology took so long to produce, because it is a complicated affair identifying those patterns and extracting them without artifacts. But yes, it is as if you were to copy a page of this manual onto one line by writing each line directly on top of the preceding line. That's actually a great analogy. So then the next line of the manual, if you can see, is just a bunch of lines typed over one another. And I genuinely can't really read it. All the letters would be there, but the copy would be illegible. Your ears, from long practice perhaps, generally have no difficulty in recognizing familiar patterns in the 24-hour-a-day waveform the world presents to them. No other instrument can even begin to approach the ease with which, say, you disentangle the voice of a friend in a crowd from all the other voices in the crowd. This is a problem in pattern recognition and has for many years been the subject of intense research by computer program designers. But the best they have done so far falls considerably short of what your ears and brain do all the time. And getting closer. How are we doing on, okay. How's everything looking and sounding out there? It looks like we're maybe okay on frame rate and stuff, but I can't quite tell. Hoping I'm not dropping frames. But yeah, let me know in the chat. In very simple cases, frequencies may be removed from a waveform by filtering, but a filter circuit is a perfect idiot. It knows nothing of what the frequencies it is blocking or boosting mean and can do nothing to separate two sounds of the same pitch. The scratch filter in a stereo amplifier cuts out some of the noise from a dirty or scratched record, but it also removes any musical sound that falls in the same frequency range as the scratches. On a good pair of speakers, this is quite audible as a loss of sparkle and airiness in the recording, a slight muffling of the sound. So one way of making more complicated waveforms out of simple ones is by mixing simple ones together. This is also sometimes called additive synthesis. The drawbars of a Hammond work by additive synthesis. In a complex waveform representing many frequencies simultaneously, some frequencies may be weakened, strengthened, or removed almost entirely by filtering. The treble and bass controls on a stereo amplifier are simple filters that boost or cut high and low audio frequencies respectively. A filter may operate over a broad or narrow range of frequencies. It may pass all signals up a certain frequency, in which case it is called a low-pass filter. It may pass only frequencies above a certain frequency, in which case it is called a high-pass filter. Or it may pass only a narrow band of frequencies, then it is a band-pass filter. If it does just the opposite, i.e. passes all frequencies except a certain band of frequencies, it is a band reject or notch filter. Simplifying a complex sound by filtering is called subtractive synthesis. To modulate a waveform is to change it systematically, following the pattern of another waveform. If the change is in frequency, then the result is frequency modulation, or FM. If the change is in amplitude, then the result is amplitude modulation, or AM. Other kinds of modulation exist and will be discussed later. So this is giving diagrams of filtered and unfiltered waveforms. So there's the unfiltered, it's sort of jagged, and then we have the filtered out, which is a smoother kind of like a rounded sawtooth in a way, or like a skewed sine wave. Anyway, and then these are diagrams of various filter effects from various topologies. So we have the low pass filter, which is cutting off everything above a certain frequency. We have the high pass filter, which is cutting off everything below a certain frequency. We've got band pass, which is only passing that frequency range through. And then we have a notch filter, or band reject, which is the opposite. So everything below and above is passing and everything else is cut out. Here's a simple example of frequency modulation. Suppose we begin with a simple oscillation, say a square wave at a frequency of 100 Hertz. Now at the rate of 25 Hertz, let's alternately double and halve again the frequency of this square wave. If we draw a graph in which up means higher frequency and down means lower frequency, and graph the changes in frequency of our 100 Hertz square wave, it looks like this. A look at the first and last graphs. So this is what it's saying it looks like. Now we have this here. It says a look at the first and last graphs and their result in the second graph show what we mean if we say that we have frequency modulated a 100 Hertz square wave by a 25 Hertz square wave. If instead of shifting suddenly up and suddenly down again, we start from 100 Hertz and move gradually up to say 200 Hertz and then started suddenly again from 100 Hertz, a graph of the changes in frequency would look like this. So I think we could patch these pretty quickly. Let's see. So what they're demonstrating here, let's see, we've got our VCO1 square wave. And let me just grab a patch cable here. So if I take the square wave LFO out, and let's see, that's actually not the patch point I want. Hold on a second. Check something. This is hilarious because I'm realizing that... There we go. That would be the best way to do it. So what... Now the frequencies of the waveforms that we're doing this with, it's kind of difficult because they're actually both based on the same waveform. So the same waveform is driving the arpeggiator, as is the pitch change that I'm patching here. So actually I should really separate those out to hear this more clearly. So let's say, now this is going to be an audio rate, but if I push it way down, there we go. So here, but I have to okay. There we go. So I had to cut off control from the keyboard so that wasn't overriding. So I basically now, granted probably like not very close to the frequencies that they're describing here, but I've now generated this. So you're hearing the lower frequency waveforms, then the pitch gets brought up with a corresponding square wave. Like that. And then if we were to do that instead with a sawtooth, then it's a gradual up and then like that. So that's what they're describing. And now I have to bring that all back. Okay. There we go. So anyway, and in this case we would say we had frequency modulated a 100 hertz square wave with a 25 hertz sawtooth. Amplitude modulation, on the other hand, of a 100 hertz square wave by a 25 hertz square wave would produce something like this. This one I'm not going to demonstrate because it would basically be what you're hearing now, only it would get louder and then quieter because you would be modulating the amplitude, and so when the corresponding square wave that's doing the modulation was high, it would be loud, and then when that waveform was brought down, then you would hear a lower volume. So I think that one you can probably picture pretty easily, so we won't go there right now. And by a 25 hertz sawtooth might look like this, and so here then you're going to get volume ramps basically, so it's going to gradually escalate in volume and drop back down every time the period of the waveform resets. So the second basic idea on which electronic synthesis is based is that wave generating and wave modifying equipment may be controlled electronically. You may think of this to begin with as a kind of remote control in which one piece of equipment may control the frequency or gain of another piece of equipment by an electrical signal. Other instruments such as electronic organs, electronic pianos, theremins, and so on generate and or modify their sound electronically just as synthesizers do, but other instruments are designed only for manual control through keys, pedals, stop tabs or knobs, and couplers. The oscillators, filters, and amplifiers in a synthesizer, however, are designed to be controlled both manually and by voltages. A vibrato effect, for example, may be obtained by manually varying the frequency of an oscillator rapidly over a small range, but a much smoother and more flexible vibrato is created by using a low-frequency sine wave to control the pitch of the oscillator output. In any oscillator, filter, or amplifier that is designed to be voltage controlled, a voltage applied to a control input will have exactly the same effect as a manual adjustment of one of the controls of the unit. Which characteristic of the unit is affected is usually indicated at the input to it. Some units may be designed so that more than one of their operating characteristics may be voltage controlled. That's what all of these inputs are, that's your ability to voltage control those parameters. A voltage-controlled oscillator, for example, may commonly have a sensitivity of 1 octave per volt. Such an oscillator would double its frequency, i.e. rise 1 octave for every increase of 1 volt in the signal applied to its control input. And a negative 1 volt signal at the input would drive the oscillator frequency down by 1 octave. A continuously fluctuating voltage would cause the oscillator frequency to continually fluctuate, and so on. So that's actually exactly what the keyboard is doing right now. So those pitches that I held down previously and latched are producing voltages that are then controlling the oscillator frequency, and that is how we're stepping through, that arpeggio over time. And so there's a number of diagrams here. So this one is just showing hand control of oscillator pitch, so you're turning a knob basically in this diagram to change the pitch of the oscillator, or voltage control, so it's showing the patch point as like sort of a virtual knob or virtual hand that is controlling the knob. And then we're just describing volt per octave in a graphic basically, and then it's showing what the different outputs would be. So plus 1 volt is 200 hertz, plus 2 volts is 400 hertz, plus 3 volts is 800 hertz, plus 4 volts is 1600 hertz, and so on. And then same with the negative, so negative 1 volt is 50 hertz, negative 2 volts is 25 hertz, negative 3 volts is 12.5 hertz, and negative 4 volts is 6.25 hertz. Lost my chat. There we go. So again, I just find reading these descriptions pretty entertaining and interesting, and yeah, I don't know how far we'll actually get through here. I mean, obviously we've been going for like 50 minutes and we're 16 pages in. I might start jumping to more of the like kind of patch examples and things in a bit. But let's get through the rest of these explanations. Yeah, well, let's see how this goes. I guess this is my slight I'm gonna call it slight ADD. I'm just like, this is stuff I know, so I'm trying to make sure that this stream is actually interesting for people of all levels and not just like only beginners or only. So if I find myself getting a little bit bored with the content, then I want to make sure that I'm keeping the stream interesting. So so we'll see. I'll go a little bit further here and see what else we get into. So it is important to remember that voltage control is an extension of manual control. In theory, anything you can do with a voltage, you should be able to do with a knob manually. In fact, your hands cannot move fast enough or accurately enough to come within miles of what a voltage signal can do with a voltage-controlled device. Continuously variable characteristics such as the frequency of an oscillator, the cutoff frequency of a filter, or the gain of an amplifier may be controlled by continuously variable voltages. Other functions that may be controlled by electrical signals are start functions and on-off functions. Signals used for this purpose are called triggers and gates respectively. An electronically triggered device will begin to operate when a voltage at the proper input goes from 0 to some positive voltage and immediately comes back to 0. On a graph such a trigger signal might look like this, and it's just showing basically a spike in voltage there. An electrically gated device will begin to operate when a voltage at the proper input goes from 0 to some positive value and will continue to operate only as long as the voltage stays at or above that value. Thus, a gate signal might look like this, and it's basically just one period of a square wave. And then, so it's showing essentially a trigger is just like a pulse. You're just pushing a momentary button to start something. A gate is more of an on-off switch, is what they're demonstrating there. So you're like kind of flipping the circuit on for a bit and then turning it back off. So it has sort of a longer period to it. A keyboard controller for a synthesizer usually works by some combination of control voltages to signal which key is pressed down, gates to signal the length of time a key is down, and triggers to signal the exact instant at which a key is pressed down. Using a signal to control something in this fashion does not make a difference to the signal. A voltage is a voltage is a voltage. There are control voltages only where there is equipment designed to be voltage controlled. Calling a signal a control signal is only saying what, in some particular case, its function is, namely, that it is being fed to the control input of a voltage controllable device. It is extremely important to be clear about this because of the other function that a voltage signal may serve, i.e. simply to provide an audio signal, pitched, tone, or noise, for modification and ultimately for listening. Between these two functions there is all the difference in the world, but there is no intrinsic difference between the signals themselves. The same output from the same oscillator may be used either as an audio signal or as a control signal. It makes no difference to the oscillator. To find out whether a signal is audio or control, don't look to where it comes from, but rather to where it goes. A synthesizer then consists of signal generating and signal modifying equipment, and some of this equipment is voltage controlled by signals which usually are generated and may be modified with the synthesizer. Each device in a synthesizer is completely separate from the others. It is electrically independent of them and has its own separate input and output points, usually readily available to the user. Every synthesizer has some provision for connecting its internal devices to each other. These may take the form of patch cords, matrix boards with pins, or matrix switches. The devices are connected to each other by the user, who may connect them in many different configurations depending on what sounds and sound patterns he wants to produce. So this is getting into, so they're showing pin boards and matrix switches, which is basically, why I have this incorporated here. And that's out of shot kind of, but the pin matrix basically, because that essentially is an alternative to just, these patch points where you're inserting cables in the signal path essentially. So you could run your patch cables. I mean, it's still going to require patch cables, but then you can essentially just pull pins and place them and do your patching that way. It's just sort of a different and sometimes faster alternative patching method. Anyway. Change this just a little. Sorry, I was getting tired of listening to that same sequence up and down. All right. Operating a synthesizer means doing two different things. One is connecting to each other the devices to be used, or setting up the patch as it is called, and the other is setting up, adjusting, and using the controls of the devices in the patch. Setting up a patch involves at least providing a path for audio signals, and every signal path must begin from either an internal or external source. I'm just looking if it's worth mentioning much here. These diagrams are pretty self-explanatory. This is just showing an audio output. This is showing a voltage control, and kind of how those are, how those are affecting each other. Then this is just showing a patch using actual patch cords, pin boards, and then a matrix, and then, connecting a bunch of modules together to produce sound, essentially. So these are the last 2 pages in the introduction here. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll read these, and then I don't know that we need to go through the description of every module in the synth right now. I think maybe from here we can jump to some of the patch examples. I just want to see what examples they provide in the book and what kind of things you can do from there. Because I haven't ever gone through the patch examples. I imagine they're probably pretty basic, but I think it's worth a shot. See what kind of things can come of it. Alright. Okay, looks like the signal's a little stronger now. How's everyone doing out there? Still, all my silent peeps. It's so funny. Every stream, I've got people there, and they're always just so quiet. I do appreciate interaction in the chat. I know I'm just kind of reading right now, but soon I will be moving on to something a little bit more dynamic, and be good to have conversation with that. So do feel free to engage, please. Alright, any signal from any device in a synthesizer may be fed directly to an external amplifier or recorder. More commonly, it will be routed through other devices before reaching the synthesizer's main output channels. Several signals may be combined in a mixer, or one signal may be split to follow two different paths, which, modifying it in different ways, may later recombine. Likewise, externally generated signals from tape recorders, preamplifiers, etc. may be fed directly into the signal input of any device in a synthesizer, provided only that the signal source output has the proper electrical characteristics, i.e. impedance and amplitude. See Section 4. Setting up a patch may also involve providing control paths, but not necessarily. It is possible to generate many interesting sounds without ever using voltage control, but it's tedious work, particularly if you're trying to get something like Mary Had a Little Lamb or something similar. In the early days of electronic synthesis, the only way you could get a tune was either by playing an oscillator by hand, as if it were a penny whistle, or by recording separately each note on tape and then splicing all the notes together. Then, for controlling the volume, you had to run the completed tape through an amplifier with one hand on the volume control while recording the result on another recorder. Likewise, for controlling the timbre or tone of the melody. Yeah, it was hard work. That is very true. Every connection in a patch is either a signal path or a control path. No connection in a patch can be both a signal and a control path at the same time. Deciding if I want to argue that point, but I won't, because you can mult signals and then they can kind of run to different connections, and so they can actually coexist in some ways, but you will have in a lot of cases a slight voltage drop, etc. But anyway, the audible effect of manipulating any manual control depends on the particular patch being used. Thus, for example, if the audio output from an oscillator is part of a signal path, then changing the frequency of the oscillator will in some way change the pitch of a sound in the synthesizer's main output. But if the same oscillator is controlling another oscillator whose output is part of the signal path, then changing the first oscillator's frequency, sorry, I lost my chat again, might change the rate of vibrato, or at a higher frequency, the timbre of a frequency modulation or amplitude modulation effect. All of the connections involved in any particular patch can be diagrammed with blocks to symbolize individual devices and arrows to indicate signal and control paths. Such a diagram is called a block diagram. Signal paths in a block diagram are indicated by horizontal lines. Outputs leave from the right side of the block and inputs enter from the left. Control paths are indicated by vertical lines. Outputs leave from the right side of the block and inputs enter from the bottom. I don't know how useful this is to all you out there, but since we will be working presumably with the block diagrams later on in the book, we will go through this. For an oscillator, you may want to specify its frequency, or you may want to specify which of several waveforms is being used. For a filter, the specification might concern frequency and or resonance. For a triggered function, the rate of repetition, and so on. A simple block diagram might look like this, and it shows a VCO to a VCF, envelope generator to that same VCF, and then an output. A more complicated one might look like this. So we have a VCO at 5 Hz, so it's basically working as an LFO into a VCO at audio frequency. We have keyboard supplying 1 volt per octave signal. This all runs to the voltage controlled filter. Then we have we have a first envelope generator here, which is receiving a gate and trigger from the keyboard, and then a second envelope generator. So the first one is being applied to the filter, I assume the cutoff frequency, but could be resonance, who knows. And then the envelope generator 2 is being applied to the VCA, and then your output. And that's that block diagram there. So block diagrams are extremely useful. Yep. And there actually is, for anyone who's not aware, the guys who did Patch and Tweak also designed a sort of block diagram signal library, or block diagram symbol library that you can use for diagramming patches. It's freely available. I don't have the URL off the top of my head, but it is a helpful resource for that sort of thing. So the next section of the manual just breaks down all of the functionality of the synth, and while that's fun and everything, I think that's probably a bit dry for a stream. So we're not going to deal with any of that. But I think what would be fun is to get into the patch examples at the end of the book and see what they provide. So that'll be, I think all of this is chapter 5, right? Yeah, okay, so chapter 5, putting it all together is your job, is what it says. We can't do it for you, but what we have done in this section is to suggest, first of all, a plan of organization so that as you really get into your instrument, you don't go out of your skull trying to remember it all. This plan of organization is inherent in the way we have structured the chapter. Second, we give you the results of our own work with the 2600 synthesizer, suggestions for special purpose patches, effects, and so on. Third, and probably most important, we encourage you to experiment on your own, systematically at first, and then with more and more freedom as your familiarity with the synthesizer grows. Your investigation should always be governed by two principles, in a sense opposites of each other. One is that no damage can be done to the 2600 by any internal connections you can possibly make. So a voltage is a voltage is a voltage, except in a formal functional sense there is no difference between signal and control voltages. There are no forbidden connections on the 2600. The other principle is that, on the other hand, not all connections are useful. And here we can do no more than to suggest the principle. We cannot undertake to define for you what patches are useful and what patches are not. What is useful in the studio is sometimes too clumsy for live performance, or too time-consuming to set up, or might involve too critical a tuning preparation. Or what is useful in live performance might be too crude or simplistic for studio use, and patches designed for instructional purposes in a classroom might have no musical value at all. A few words about our procedure in this chapter. We begin from the classic oscillator filter amplifier patch without voltage control and build onto it until we have arrived at the classic live performance patch. Each significant addition to the patch is illustrated with at least a block diagram. For the first few, we also give a diagram of the 2600 face panel showing the patch connections. Note that since all the connections involved in what we have called the classic patch are pre-wired in the 2600, activating them is simply a matter of raising or opening a few attenuators. This remains true for many of the more complicated or unusual patches that we deal with later on. Accordingly, on our block diagrams we indicate with the abbreviation P-chord those connections that are not part of the 2600 pre-wired patch and must be made by the user with patch cords. Note, too, that because of the pre-wired patch connections, it is important that all input attenuators not involved in a particular patch must be completely closed, i.e. all the way down. Failure to observe this precaution will result in a great deal of confusion. The abbreviations used in the block diagrams are derived from the initials of the 2600 functions. Thus, EF is envelope follower, MP the microphone preamp, and so on. Since there are three separate voltage processors, we refer to them by their function, VP invert or VP lag. To simplify the diagrams, we allow control signals to leave either from the right side or the top. Ring modulator inputs are drawn according to the way the modulator is functioning in each patch. In general, signal paths are from left to right and control paths from bottom to top. This chapter is designed to be user expandable with additional patch diagrams, block diagrams, performance notes, etc. To make this easier, we have, as far as possible, restricted the later portions of the text to 2 numbered sections on each page. Between any 2 pages, therefore, another page can be inserted and numbered in logical subordination to the other pages. The system is indefinitely expandable. From time to time, as 2600 users feed back to us the results of their experience, we will send out patch and user notes to be inserted in their proper places in this chapter. That's a fun concept. Alright, the classic patch and its extensions. So this is basically just oscillator to VCF to VCA to output, in which an oscillator or noise output at some audio frequency is filtered and amplified. This is the way it was done in the days before voltage control and still forms the basis for many patches you will find useful. As the block diagram indicates, we are talking here only about the path of an audio signal through a filter and an amplifier. Since the only point of the amplifier's presence in the signal path is to provide amplitude control over the signal, it could perfectly well be replaced so long as we are concerned only with manual control by a simple attenuator. If that were done, the patch would essentially reduce to source to VCF, voltage controlled filter, to the output. Strictly speaking, this should be source VCF VCA mix pan out. But the mix and pan controls play no active part in these patches or in your activities at this point. Rather than make our diagrams unnecessarily complicated, we omit the last two elements in the patch, which is about as basic as you can. Alright, so that was an aside. But so source to VCF out, which is about as basic as you can get. This section is going to be very wordy while you're getting your bearings. By the time you reach 514 or so, they'll be moving a little faster. Alright, let's see if it makes sense to actually read all this. I mean, I guess I'm going to. It is indeed wordy. I think let's do this. So they have kind of the intended settings here. So let's go ahead and kind of get these in place, and then I'll read. They have everything center aligned here. Those are all down. These are all good. Oh, I guess they're starting us at like a completely silent point from the look of things. I'm not gonna, they have the speakers turned up. I'm not going to bother with that. Voltage processor's down. Initial gain. These are all down. Okay. Yeah, it's basically everything zeroed out. Is there anything else that I need to pay attention to? Keyboard control is on. And okay. That's really funny, because it basically says like basic patch for getting sound from your ARP, but I don't know if they make adjustments to that, but based on how it is here, I don't see how that would even be true. You would at least need to, I don't know, we'll see. Let me just go through this real quick and see what they're suggesting. Alright, so use this basic patch to acquaint yourself with the behavior of the oscillators, including their frequency ranges, tonal character of their audio waveforms, and so on. With the action of the low-pass filter or signals fed into it, and with the dispensability of the amplifier when it is subject only to manual control. Let's do this one thing at a time. Begin with the following settings and return to them whenever later in this chapter we say something like start from the beginning or words to that effect. If you need to know where to start, this is it. All input attenuators and output level controls at their minimum or off position. This is always down for vertical sliders and left for horizontal sliders. All VCO control sliders, including the pulse width controls on 2 and 3, centered. Range switches to audio position. Let me just verify the range switch that he's referring to. I'm actually not sure. Oh, okay, I see. I think I see. All right, anyway. And I have to admit, I read this manual as if it's Perlman writing this stuff. I don't know if that's actually who wrote the manual. So, but for some reason in my head, I picture him reading it. So if I say he, that's not meant to be like a sort of gendered assumption. It's just that I'm picturing Perlman reading about the synthesizer he created. Anyway, VCF initial frequency and fine-tune sliders at maximum. Yeah, we're there. Extreme right. Resonance slider at minimum. Extreme left. Yep. All envelope generator control sliders at minimum. Gate selector switch to keyboard upper position. Yeah. Okay. VCA initial gain control to maximum right position. Yeah. Pan pot centered reverb minimum. Yep. Noise generator controls centered. Oh, that's interesting. That's not how that looked on the diagram they showed. Okay. On the keyboard, all three switches at the front should be in their right-hand position. What is that referring to? All three switches. Anything we haven't mentioned either is covered implicitly in A to G or doesn't matter. The best course to take with the speaker volume controls is to leave them about 3/4 of the way open and then change the volume whenever you feel like it. Yeah, but they wouldn't be producing any sound right now. Oh, you know what? I have to take this out, I think. And then where should those controls be, just to check? Okay, they have those all the way down as well. I'm missing something, because this should be, I think, producing like a constant. That's very interesting. Anyway, all right, let's see what else happens here. Open fully the mixer input from the VCF and the VCF input from VCO3. After this, we'll refer to these simply as VCF mixer and VCF3. All right, so mixer input. You should hear a medium-low humming tone from the speakers. Well, no, because something is still not quite. There we go. But that's not medium-low, that's for sure. Huh. Does this have a range control? I didn't expect to like be stumbling around a basic patch here, but okay. Yeah, medium low. Can you call that medium low? I don't call that medium low, but sure. If you don't, ask yourself as systematic a set of questions as you can about the signal path you just set up and about what operating characteristics. Sorry, that's hard to listen to. You have set for each function in the path. In the course of answering your questions, you will discover that you've overlooked something. For the present case, we suggest the following. Is VCO3 in its audio range? Well, yes, but it's rather high, so I'm going to bring it down a bit. Have you, by accident, pressed one of the upper keyboard notes and driven VCO3 out of audible range? There we go. Remember that the keyboard will hold for an indefinite period of time the last voltage keyed from it. Develop the habit of flicking the lowest key before setting any VCO initial frequency controls or attempting to tune 2 or more VCOs to any particular pitch or pitch interval. Flicking the lowest key? Alright. Fair enough. This is thrilling entertainment, I'm sure. Alright, so anyway, let's... This sound is the VCO3 sawtooth waveform, essentially unmodified at a frequency somewhere below 1 kilohertz. Yeah. Experiment on it. Use the VCO3 frequency sliders to raise and lower the pitch. You will discover that the initial frequency slider can raise and lower the pitch to above and below audibility without assistance from the fine-tune slider. Alright, let's get into more demanding patches here, because this is very, very basic stuff, which I thought it would be, but I thought that would have been handled a little earlier. So let's see. Right. Open the VCO1 filter input. Pre-wired input with VCO is a square wave. Yeah, let's push. Okay. Saying to briefly familiarize yourself with the range of control as you did with the VCO3. Note particularly that the extreme low frequency range, the square wave, produces 2 clicks for every one produced by the sawtooth. Yes, yes. So that's what they're referring to there. You can hear that pulsing because now it's in LFO territory. Okay. This is because the square wave has 2 sharp voltage changes in each cycle. Each one will produce a click. Yeah. Let's move to a deeper patch here. Now we're bringing noise generation in. The other. Go. So that's all 3 oscillators and the noise generator. That's if I push it up to white noise. That's low frequency. It's currently set to pink. That's the highest amplitude it will produce. That's minimum, and this is somewhere in the middle. I'm just kind of skimming through here and trying to get to something a little bit more exciting. It would be a good idea, too, to perform a few other experiments to familiarize yourself thoroughly with the action of the VCF and with its timbre control possibilities. We outline them briefly here. Instead of leaving the input frequency constant and sweeping the filter frequency, leave the filter frequency constant and sweep the input frequency. So they have it. They're saying around 500 kilohertz, which would actually be somewhere in here. but I think we're yeah, I mean, that's really sort of but that's what they're referring to. It's kind of, I almost need to leave the filter almost fully open right now with the way these are tuned to even hear that. Okay, anyway. Depressing the lowest key on the keyboard, which we've already done. Tune the filter at a fairly high resonance to some upper harmonic of an input waveform. Play a tune on the keyboard and note that as long as the filter is fed with a keyboard control voltage, it will follow the harmonic you've tuned to. Now disconnect it from the keyboard voltage by inserting a dummy plug in the keyboard CV filter control input. Play the same tune on the keyboard again and note the difference. This time the filter picks out whichever harmonic component of the input signal lies closest in frequency to the peaking frequency of the filter. If any note in your tune happens to have no harmonic components near the filter cutoff, the filter output will be greatly minimized. Alright, these are still all very basic experiments, so let's see. Further research. I'm just going to go back to, I mean, we could sit here with a drone, but it's a little bit more interesting if there's a little variation. All right. Doo-ba-doo. Well, this is turning out not to be quite as exciting as I was hoping, but let's see what some of the more quote-unquote advanced patches would be in here. Ring modulator to VCF to VCA. Okay. The general performance patch. What have we got? Let's just see what this even sounds like. it says raise one or two at a time. It's basically just saying to do different combinations of things with the input to the filter. But now the ring mod. They've got that up full. It just sounds like I'm clipping, but I'm not. Okay, this is. Oh, that's interesting. What's that distortion we're getting in there? Maybe that's just in my headphones, but I'm hearing a little distortion. Alright, let's turn that off. As I play poorly here. So it seems like the way they have this set up, I mean, it's very basic. I need to mark my spot here somehow. Hold on a second. So they're just using they're saying to basically like play with the envelope control over the filter. But as I said in the beginning of this stream, I mean, like this as just a straight subtractive synthesizer, just using the normal connections and everything, like it sounds so good. Like I that's why I haven't really dug too deeply into experimenting with it, because I get here and I'm like, man. And it has the two, the Korg one here has the two different filter topologies. So that's the later model, like this is, if I understand the, correctly, if I remember correctly, this is the original like Moog style filter. And then it's a little bit, let me pull the resonance up a bit. So there's the original. And then you can hear it most when you really crank the resonance. So that's the original, the Moog style. So Moog, and then the later ARP. It's pretty subtle, but it is a difference. So, yeah. And I mean, right now, that's all three oscillators blended. The ring mod is pulled up, but I don't actually think it's doing anything right now. But yeah, because if I pull that down, there's no difference. Right. But anyway. Oh, forgot to hold latch. All right. Alright, so what other patches I got? These are all très simple. Yeah, this is pretty simple stuff. So, alright, so here alright, so what it's saying about the performance patch, which is basically what I have up here, it says, "You've arrived. With this general performance patch, we formally give you permission, as if you needed it, to make full, free, and complete use of the keyboard entirely at your own discretion. If your main and primary interest is live performance using a more or less standard 12 notes to the octave scale, then you already know 90% of what you need to in order to play from now until doomsday without ever repeating the same patch and control settings. With this patch, we also announce that the text of your 2600 instruction manual is coming to a close. You will hear from us from time to time in the patch notes following and in the alignment ritual given in section 6, but essentially our task is completed. A few reminders. 1. Make notes on any particular effect you want to be able to recreate, even now when you're learning, especially now when you're learning. In your later experiments, you'll know exactly what's going on and will be able to remember how particular effects were generated, but right now it's doubtful that you could. Hardly anyone has ever worked with a synthesizer without discovering very early in his or her acquaintance with it at least a few sounds that he or she never is able to duplicate afterwards. Always take the time when you discover a new sound or new effect to think out exactly how it is being produced and exactly how each element and setting in the patch contributes to the result. Yeah. Okay, cool. Alright, so this is now an alternate form of the performance patch in which two parallel signal paths feed the VCF and VCA respectively before being mixed. So what we have here so this is basically like a sample and hold patch. So it says, with proper control settings, the 2600 output will be a sequence of notes at random pitches, following one another at a rate determined by the internal clock. Begin with these control settings and then vary them systematically. VCF and VCA initial frequency and gain at minimum. Proper control inputs spelled with an M at maximum. Envelope generators gating switch to lower position. VCOs in audio range about 500 hertz. Sample and hold oscillator inputs about 2/3 open. So that's going to be There. And let's see. But I think I have to, yeah. We may wish to no longer latch that, and instead, let's see, so we've got these guys. We also want this. So this is like your standard. And if you go real fast with the rate at this, this is like those old like sci-fi computer noises basically. But anyway. And if you decrease the level, essentially like the range of the voltage, or you can think of it kind of like the amplitude, but if you decrease the range of the voltage that's going, that's passing from the sample and hold, so if you attenuate that down, you get a much more narrow range of randomization. And then as you increase it, it gets more wild, so this is like the widest range. Anyway, classic. So let me just kind of stop that for now. And let's see what I think I have to bring that back down out of here and here. Okay. So let's see, what else have they got? Anything exciting? Alright, so then, yeah, they're showing the basic sample and hold patch here. Other sequence generating patches. This covers those patches in which some other complex of control voltages is substituted for the keyboard control voltage, gate, and or trigger. Primary among these is the combined sample and hold internal clock patch given in 5.151, which is this here, which I think was what we were basically already doing. Oh, except they have the ring mod in fully. Anyway, I mean, we already heard that. But let's see what else. So, noise generator to the sample and hold, internal clock. Oh, so the clock in this case is also driving the envelope generator, which is driving the VCF. And then that clock is simultaneously then driving the VCA either via, so there's two envelopes in the synth. There's an attack decay sustain release envelope, ADSR, or there's just an attack release envelope, and it's basically saying either one of those can be driving the VCA for this patch. it looks like they're saying the ring modulator would be optional in this circuit, essentially. Yeah. Plausible variations. Okay. Well, admittedly, I don't find those extremely exciting to try. So let's see. Okay, so this says you might, if you wish, begin with a slightly simplified patch, omit the sample and hold circuit, and feed 2 VCOs directly into the electronic switch. Then experiment thoroughly and systematically. Go on to the patch above. Don't neglect the possibilities of audio range switching rates. The internal clock is capable of rates up to about 100 hertz. So the idea there would be to basically be alternating between 2 VCOs via the clock. So you could potentially be like kind of changing your timbre or your tuning back and forth. Another sequential patch. Use the rest of this section to file complete patches, i.e. those which produce an audible output more or less continuously without requiring interference from you. Many of them, of course, use of the keyboard is at least optional, but it should not be necessary. The patches you will file under 514 will be those which produce no output unless you play them from the keyboard. Okay. So these are all very basic. I was expecting a little bit more complexity towards the end. This one, they're just essentially taking any signal, inverting it, and passing like a filtered version and inverted version to the VCA, which would basically cancel out any of the filtered aspects. And then there's a PWM patch for pulse width modulation, which I don't even think you... Do you need to patch that? I thought that had a normal connection. No, maybe not. Anyway. Then we have reverbs. Yeah, these are all very simple. Envelope generator. Into the ring modulator, into the lag circuit. Okay, that would be... I'd be curious to hear what that sounds like. Alright, you know what? I gotta admit, these are all pretty standard patches in here so far. Although there are a couple here that use the mic preamp, but the input on this is a 3.5 millimeter, and I would have to figure out exactly what I have around that I could use to connect any sort of microphone, or I mean, like a guitar I could go in, but like from an XLR to whatever that 3.5 millimeter input is, I don't even know if that's balanced, or I don't think it can provide, well, yeah, it couldn't do anything with phantom voltage, but like a dynamic mic might work, but I'm not even entirely certain. Alright, so here's what I'm going to do. That was fun. Was not as fun as I was expecting, I have to admit. But I think let's experiment with the synth, but let's do it in the context of more than just the sounds of the synth itself, I think, maybe. Like, let's start playing around as a bit of a composition or something. and see what kind of stuff we can come up with that's a little bit more left field, maybe. I do have to take a brief break. Before we do that, I have so many wires connected to me. I have to try to make sure I don't like pull over these things. All right. I have not made graphics yet for stepping away from the stream for a second, so give me 1 second to do this. All right, I will be right back. Let's see, what does this even sound like compared to the guitar stuff that was playing earlier? All right, let's do something that's actually in key with that. Real quick. Close enough. All right. Give me 2 minutes. And I will be right back. Okay. I'm over here. Hey, folks. All right, so well, let's see. I think let's I'm gonna go ahead and oh, that's not what I want. I'm gonna go ahead and create some new sequences here. Now the other thing I want to do, real quick, but I have to check the instrument definition first. Alright, so that's port 3, channel 10 in theory. We'll see if that actually works once I set it up, but alright, so let's create new. Actually, I'm going to create, I hadn't, for this particular setup here right now, I hadn't created an instrument definition for the ARP yet. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And all of these I have abbreviated with FR for finishing rig, because that's what I call this setup. FR10, not to be confused with fart. All right. Looks like I have pieces of ceiling tile on the circle. I don't know what happened there. ARP2. Is there room for another? No, that's okay. So port 3, channel 10, if memory serves. Multi off, poly spread off, no transpose off. Okay, that should be good. Create CK pattern. All right. So now I have not though connected MIDI. I'm running low on appropriate MIDI cables for this, so I'm going to have to use a really long one. It's like a 30-foot, and I hope it doesn't impart any delay or lag or anything. It should be okay. I think this is about the maximum that you want to go spec-wise before it can cause issues. So we're going to go channel 3 here. And this. Okay. And assuming that everything is still, because the ARP, the MIDI channel selection is done with dip switches. So I'm assuming that I shouldn't have to think too hard about this, and it should already be... Oh, sorry. I'm like wandering out of frame, and here you can see what I'm doing this way. But I believe the dip switches should still be set properly, and I should be able to just drop this MIDI cable in over there, and that should give me control. I'm like knocking things over. I have all these weird antennas. This is actually like a TV antenna, and I had some successful, some failed experiments with playing around with different antenna types for receiving shortwave signals for the Soma Messiver, which is over there on the shelf, which last I tried it was not working, but I need to get into it again at some point. I have headphones on, so I can't really hear what's happening in the room. It's not like something else fell over, but I don't see anything, so I don't know what I missed. But anyway, I was supposed to send a video of it to Soma a while ago, and I just have not gotten around to doing it because I have the antennas were set up outside, and it's been very cold, so it has not been really appropriate to set those back up. Anyway. Alright. I like this sequence, but I'm going to stop it and turn off latching because I want to test if I have regained control over this from the Circlon. So let's see. I believe that's the ARP. Yeah, sounds like it's working. Whoop. So first things first. Okay, I'm not entirely sure what just happened. Basically, all the power on that side of the room dropped for just a moment. I think so. There's a precariously balanced surge protector back there, which I wasn't thinking would be a problem. I think what happened was it fell, and then I think it just basically barely knocked the cord to the power conditioner that everything is essentially running through. So sorry for the silence for a moment there. That's great. Note to self, fix that. Yeah. And hope I didn't blow up anybody's speakers there in case that went with a bit of a pop or bang when it went out. Yeah, I need to have a little bit better power safety apparently for future streams. Anyway, I'm just trying to give myself a little bit of a metronome to operate off of. And decide if I want to slow things down. Yeah, 144 is way too fast. I'm gonna go super slow, like 80 BPM. Okay. Okay, so I think I want to build off this guitar vibe that's happening. I'm going to add some stuff, and then I think I'm gonna pull the guitars out, or pull them down and see how it's feeling without them, and then we'll start experimenting with the ARP. Right now, I'm going to add in the can't really point to it too well here, but the Odyssey, which is the black and orange on the second row of the shelf there. I want to center around D for this. I don't know if that sounds better lower. It's fine, but I think I like it. I think I like it if it pokes out a little bit more than that. All right, so let's go to pattern. We're gonna take this out to 8 bars. One note in there that I did not like. There we go. Fixed it. So now, oh, I was gonna say, I'm here trying to play the ARP and it looks like it stayed powered off after the power failure there, so that's why I'm not getting anything. That explains it. Can I reach without wrecking things? Yes. Okay, there we go. Cool. All right. Oh, you know what happened? Boy, my MIDI routing failed too because I didn't get to save that after I changed that in the preset. Now it should work. Okay. Sounds like the tuning's a little weird. But what I can do is all right, so now also quite what I meant to do in terms of the pattern, but that's all right. So, actually, let me get rid of a couple of those instances. So. Let's just see if the matriarch, that's at the top there, if I can add anything. Might be a bit too much, actually. that's a bed that we can work with a little bit here. Now, oh, whoops, let me change the camera actually. Let's go back to our sort of focused. Now I need to tune the ARP because it's sounding pretty sad. But one thing I want to check real quick. So if we pull all that guitar loop out, this is what we have right now. Alright, I'm going to tune this. That's, at least to my ears, that's sounding a little bit. See how it goes with this. Alright, so let's just start messing around. Feeding a little bit of noise into the filter right now, just give it a little bit of a grittier feel. So this is modulating the cutoff. How's it looking and sounding out there? If anyone can let me know, I'd appreciate it. Looks like I might be dropping frames occasionally. I basically just have an icon for connection strength, and it was yellow, which usually means I'm dropping frames a little bit. So let me know if I'm jittery or if the audio's got any issues. So what I did there, and I wasn't sure how it would sound, but it's kind of interesting. So I patched the output of the ring mod into, like, to override the keyword voltage control of the filter. And then if I change the balance of the ring mod, I can kind of affect differently how that impacts things. I think maybe now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some very subtle sample and hold to the pitch of the first two oscillators. See, there you can hear it. That's not so subtle if I push it in. Sounds terrible, right? But if I pull it down, what it's going to do is it's just going to give, like if I attenuate that voltage that's coming out of the sample and hold, it's just going to give it a little bit of fluctuation so it sounds kind of warbly and lo-fi. Now I would like to patch in this 1-bit delay. Liking this. Alright, let me do something here. Alright, now I want to tweak tweak the matriarch a bit here. So if my headphones will reach, which I think they should. Whoops. That's the worst. Alright, let me do something real quick here. for playing for me. Alright, well that's a nice little passage. So how can we build on this? Alright, so where can we go with this in an hour? We got an hour left. Let me just that's without the guitar. Trying to decide if I want to sample that guitar so that I can recreate this. One thing I am curious about, because I did sort of, I mean, more or less sample it into the looper, so let's see what that sounds like without the other loop in the background. Is it even playing? Huh, interesting. The answer appears to be no. Don't know what happened there. Okay. Let's see about a kind of a slow build here. How can we intensify this? So I just got the drums working a little bit more. See if there's anything that a bass can contribute Let me just make sure I'm tuned. Sounds like it might be a little out. It's tuned pretty weird. Like a half step down, except the low E was drop D. I don't know why it was tuned like that. I don't remember tuning it that way. I don't know if it's just been through temperature changes and stuff that would have gotten that out of whack. This bass is usually pretty solid that way, but hard to say. Let's see if we can do that. Where's my loop? Oh, something's weird. Now, the one thing that I have not done, that I wish I would have done now, now that I'm doing this, because I think that loop is going to just slowly go slightly out of phase with everything. And I've been meaning to hook and I think I said this on the last stream, and I still haven't done it. I've been meaning to hook the RC300 up to basically receive clock from the Circlon. I think I maybe need to fix that right now, because that loop's just going to keep going out of phase and it's really not going to work out so well. So let's fix that. Now, I don't know if there's going to be any settings that I have to dig into there for it to just kind of pull clock properly. We're about to find out, I guess. Whoops, tripping over my own chords here. I provide quality entertainment. All right. Watch me as I take myself down in the middle of my studio. All right, so now Well, MIDI receive channel is 1, but it should be getting clock from anything coming through the input there, because that, I think, clock should be out of Omni. Let's see what happens. Try that loop again. I don't know how well this is going to work. I don't know if it'll actually be taking clock from that MIDI input, but the input channel is correct. So far, so good. I like how 2 weeks in a row I was complaining about not having connected MIDI to the RC300, and then that's how long it took to get it working. It was like 30 seconds. Go figure. Guitar stand is in the way of the pedal. There we go. So that's the sound we wound up with on the ARP. So that's the last thing you're hearing there. You hear all that kind of grimy noise in the filter. It's like that. It's kind of a hiss. There's also the ring mod controlling the filter as well. Honestly, this is feeling like a good place to end the stream. It's a little earlier than I was planning. I was going to go for another half hour originally. But I'm kind of liking this as a stopping point. So not sure where y'all are in the world, those of you watching. I've been kind of adding a public service announcement to the end of these streams, given that I'm located in the United States, and I really don't like what's going on here right now. And so I would like to appeal to all y'all. 1 second. Let me actually get in front of a camera here. So, listen, here's the thing. I don't like getting political on a music stream. I mean, that's really not the point of these streams. They're intended to be inclusive and be for everybody. So I'm not trying to polarize. I'm not trying to, alienate anyone. What I want to say is the things that are happening in the U.S. right now. And look, I understand, there's a lot of countries in the world where this kind of thing has been the norm for a long time, and I am sympathetic to that, or empathetic to that, however you want to think of it. However, we have at least had, the illusion here in the U.S. of this not being the norm. I mean, we literally have, full-out concentration camps happening and stuff, and this is not okay. And not only that, but just, there's a lot of stuff going on with sort of the increasing surveillance and things like that. So my appeal to anyone that's here in the U.S. is, if you are uncomfortable, please don't stay silent. We have to stay peaceful, because it's not going to work if we, try to violently overthrow anything. That's not a good idea. I think there's a lot more strength in a peaceful movement. But that being said, I'm of the opinion, the argument I make to everybody is there are certain traits that are just basic human experience, right? So there's, things that you have no control over, like the color of your skin, your gender identity. And I do believe that, if you're experiencing, identifying as a gender other than you were born, that is a valid experience. That is something that, no one who has not been in that position can come along and say that that's invalid somehow. And I've experienced close enough things in my life that I think I understand where that lives in terms of an experience and such. And so, color of skin, gender identity, sexual preference, spirituality, religion, all of those things, like that's living life. And as long as someone is peaceable and respectful and isn't, forcing their beliefs on someone else, I think it is a general human right to be able to live as we choose. Again, like, if you're not bothering anyone, like, what's the problem? Like, just mere existence bothers a lot of people, and that, taken to the extreme, is how you wind up with the kind of situations that we have right now. So, I would basically appeal to anyone in the U.S. who is uncomfortable with the current state of affairs to please just not stay silent and use your voice. I think that's the most valuable thing we have right now. That and our money. You can vote with dollars. That, unfortunately, is one of the things that gets the most attention the most quickly. So I personally have participated in the resist and unsubscribe movement. I've unsubscribed from a lot of technical products that I had subscriptions to. And while that movement is intended to be just kind of like a month-long boycott, I don't really see myself going back. I don't see the point. And I'm also just kind of starting to look into potential protections just from a privacy perspective and stuff, things that you can do to, stay a little bit more off the grid in that regard, because it is getting extreme. So anyway, please don't stay silent. That is my appeal to you all. Please speak up. Please join. Please, let's establish community. That's actually one of the reasons I came back and started streaming as regularly as I'm doing now, is because we need community right now. And I'm kind of out in the boonies. It's a little bit difficult for me to easily find groups and things to participate with. So at the very least, I can show up here on these streams and potentially reach an international audience. And that's in some ways even more powerful, although I do love in person. So I will be starting to look at organizing some events in my area here. I am in the Pennsylvania region, eastern Pennsylvania. But for anyone that's not local, that's what these streams are for. So thank you all for spending time with me this afternoon. With my silly quest to read the 1971 ARP manual. Little disappointed. It was a little bit less exciting than I was hoping. I was hoping for some, quirky patches in the patch examples and stuff, and well, that just turns out not to be that true. But it was fun, and I'm probably going to spend some time and go through the rest of the content just to see what I missed, but on my own time. Don't need to subject you all to that. But anyway, thanks for your time, and hope you enjoyed the music. This is kind of building on the concept from last week a little bit. I think I will probably take some time and develop this into a little bit more of a composition. I do like the direction this was headed. And I'm getting closer to the EP release. I've been mentioning this. Thank You for Your Attention is what it's called. It was supposed to come out like several years ago, but got hung up in process for quite a while. At some point I'll go into the details on that. I'm probably going to do a video on it. I do have a sort of a catch-up YouTube video that I'm almost done editing. I've been taking forever getting the edits done, as I always do. But it just kind of, it's just meant to cover the span of time between when I did the first installment of the sort of studio series to break down the design of my studio and everything, and now present day, because I just kind of fell off with that. And getting back into the swing of things here. I've made some life changes. I have more time to devote to this stuff, so I am going all in. So I appreciate your attention. I appreciate your time. I love you all, and I hope you're staying safe out there. And I will see you in the next one. We will be back next week at this exact same time. I do 2 other streams during the week if you're interested in other types of content. So on Mondays, I do a DIY stream. I'm currently building the Clacktronics Build Your Own Modular kit. I've had that for like a year and a half. It's been sitting. I bought it to support the project. I mean, I haven't had it on screen today, but I have a giant modular set up across the room. Takes up a whole wall. And so I didn't need that kit, but it's a beautiful project. It's really well done. I really like the work Ben and everyone put into that. And so, yeah, I wanted to support it. And so I picked up, I pre-ordered it from Thonk as soon as it was announced, basically, and it's just been sitting on a shelf. So now I'm going through the build. We got as far as the enclosures and the power supplies, so now we're actually going to start getting into the modules. And I did get permission from Ben at Clacktronics to just kind of go through the contents of the book on the stream, because there's a lot of interesting information on why the circuits are designed the way they're designed and stuff. So we'll be going through that. I forget what's next in the series in the book. It's basically laid out like chapters. I think it's probably the VCOs, but I'm not entirely certain. So we'll find out on Monday. So that'll be next Monday, and then Friday. It will be the first of its kind, because I had one scheduled for last week, but I had some issues with the accounts related to it, so I wasn't able to stream in time because I didn't have permission to stream to YouTube. But I will be doing on my Drifting Lines account, which is where I do all my like artwork and everything. I'm going to be doing essentially a digital painting stream. I'm going to be working on the graphic novel that I have that's been, awaiting production for quite a long time. It's called Dream Stayers. I've had the script forever, and I'm finally going to be getting through that, basically. Just do it. So we're going to be starting from the beginning, basically page 1. Everything's storyboarded, so I'll just be working on the actual illustrations on stream. So if you're interested in something like that, drop in. Again, all of this stuff is very different types of content, so I have them split out as separate channels, but everything is co-located in my link tree. Like if you go to my Instagram, which is just _TR_CK, so truck, but just with a leading underscore and an underscore where the U should be. Turns out truck is a rather common handle. But no, I mean, I've had that for a very long time. But even with the leading underscore, that didn't save me. So that is over on my link tree if you go to my Instagram account there, and you will find everything. And yeah, and this was fun. Hopefully you got a sense for this synthesizer a bit. I mean, I've hardly done anything in terms of any creative patching. That it was mostly the normal connections, and you can hear how expressive this thing can be, and how just how good it sounds. I mean, that spring reverb is just sort of this magical touch. I always think Boards of Canada when I do any of the sort of like normal connection type subtractive synth sounds with this thing. I don't know why it calls their music to mind so strongly for me, but it really does, and I just love it. It's one of my favorite synths. No offense to all my other synths that are here, but it really, I mean, it's a classic for a reason. So yeah, hopefully that was enjoyable for you, and yeah, we'll look forward to the next one. Thanks very much. Love y'all. See you later. Stay safe out there.